I wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. Standing in the doorway of my friend's house, holding my backpack like it was a lifeline, I felt a mix of guilt and exhilaration I didn't understand yet. The hallway smelled faintly of vanilla and laundry detergent, a warm, domestic scent that somehow made my chest tighten. She was there, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed but not fully closed off. Her hair, a rich chestnut streaked with silver, fell loosely around her shoulders, soft and natural. I noticed the subtle curve of her jaw, the way her eyes flicked up from the mug she held to measure me with quiet curiosity. Mid-40s, they said? Mid-40s, but to me, she radiated a kind of understated confidence and warmth that made it impossible to look away. I wasn't expecting you, she said, voice calm but carrying a subtle note that made my stomach knot. I didn't know where else to go, I admitted, my hands twisting the straps of my backpack. I wanted to appear casual, but my throat felt tight, my words clumsy. She studied me a moment longer, then exhaled softly, a gesture that somehow carried both patience and something deeper I couldn't name. You can stay here tonight if you want, she said, almost as if testing herself as much as me. Her words hit me harder than I expected. The air between us shifted, charged with something silent but undeniable. I wanted to protest, say I couldn't, but even the thought of leaving that room, of stepping back into the world outside, seemed unbearable. I walked in, feeling the slight brush of her arm as she moved to set her mug down. A shock ran through me, subtle, brief, but enough to make my heartbeat spike. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. She smiled then, a small, knowing curve of her lips, the kind that made me feel both seen and entirely exposed. You don't have to be tense, she said softly. It's just me. Just stay. Her presence was intoxicating, like the quiet before a storm I didn't want to run from. I caught myself staring at the curve of her neck, the way her hand lingered on the counter a moment too long, and instantly scolded myself. Focus. Calm down. But the magnetic pull between us refused to be ignored. We moved around each other in a careful, almost choreographed dance, making coffee in silence, the clink of mugs punctuating a rhythm neither of us fully controlled. Every glance lingered longer than necessary. Every brush of fingers, accidental or not, sent sparks I couldn't name. At some point, the tension became unbearable, and I leaned against the fridge, pretending to check my phone. My mind, however, was a mess of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider before, staying too close, lingering touches, the warmth of her hand brushing mine. Her gaze found me across the counter, and for a long moment she said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence between us hummed with unsaid things, desire, curiosity, the dangerous thrill of crossing boundaries. Then, just as I opened my mouth to say something foolish, the sharp chime of a doorbell broke the tension. Both of us froze, eyes locking for a fraction too long, and I realized in that instant that nothing could remain the same tonight. I couldn't stop my mind from racing, even as I poured myself a glass of water in the dim kitchen light. Every move she made seemed deliberate, even when it was mundane, pouring coffee, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, stretching just enough to make the curve of her back visible. I tried to tell myself it was normal, that it was just me being awkward. But the weight of the room, the quiet hum between us, said otherwise. Her life felt like an open book I wasn't supposed to read. I'd caught glimpses of it in the small details, the framed photos of her with my friend as a kid, the awards and certificates on the wall, the subtle lines of a woman who'd lived and loved and lost. I imagined what it must have been like to navigate life at her age, divorces, heartbreak, years of compromise, and I felt a strange mix of admiration and longing. I didn't belong in that world. And yet, standing there, I wanted in. She seemed to sense my thoughts. You're quiet, she said, leaning against the counter with her mug pressed to her lips. Her eyes were soft but curious, and I could feel the weight of her gaze like a hand on my shoulder. I guess I'm just tired, I said, knowing it wasn't the truth. My tiredness was nothing compared to the storm building inside me. She smiled faintly, a shadow of knowing sadness crossing her face. Tired of what? She asked. And I realized she wasn't asking about homework, or work, or life in general. She was asking about this, about the tension neither of us had the courage to name. I wanted to tell her everything, how I felt like I shouldn't even be standing here, how every glance, every brush of skin made my chest ache, but I swallowed it down. Words were dangerous. Silence, I hoped, could be safe, for now. Her vulnerability was different from mine. I saw it in the way her fingers lingered on her mug, the small slump of her shoulders, the faint sighs she didn't bother hiding. She had fought battles I couldn't fully understand, carried regrets I couldn't even imagine. And yet in her presence I felt visible. Seen. Not as a boy, not as a friend's kid, but as someone she might choose to care about. I moved closer to the counter, pretending to reach for sugar, but the distance between us shrank without either of us acknowledging it. My hand brushed hers, just lightly, a flick of skin on skin, and a jolt shot through me that made my heart race. She didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect. No words. No confessions. Just the weight of two people standing on the edge of something they shouldn't yet define. And for the first time, I felt a strange certainty that, however reckless, however taboo, this connection was real. Then, without thinking, I found myself whispering her name, not aloud, but to the air between us. Her fingers twitched against mine. That tiny, silent acknowledgement, more than words could convey, was enough to promise that tonight, nothing would be the same again. I was standing too close to her, again, though I kept telling myself it was accidental. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the air warmer, and every movement she made seemed amplified in the quiet. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. She reached for the coffee pot at the same time I did. Our hands collided lightly, but enough to send a charge straight through me. I jerked back, muttering an apology I barely heard. She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me a look, soft, curious, and just dangerous enough to make my stomach drop. I began, then stopped. Couldn't. Shouldn't. Every rational thought screamed at me, "You're her son's friend. This is insane. Step back." Yet my feet didn't move. And then the sound of a key turning in the lock froze me. My heart skipped. She tensed too, her hand gripping the counter a little tighter. I knew immediately who it was, her ex-husband, back from some late meeting. He'd never been threatening, but suddenly the room felt smaller, the stakes higher. "Hey, you two!" His voice called casual, but it was enough to make me want to disappear. She straightened, pushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and offered the practiced warmth of someone used to hiding things. "Hi! You're home early," she said. I moved back, suddenly aware of every inch of my presence, every pulse in my chest. The tension between us hadn't dissipated, it was just layered now, mixed with guilt and fear. I shouldn't be feeling this. She shouldn't be standing here with me, looking at me like I wasn't a kid anymore. After a few moments, he disappeared into another room. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my shoulders trembling just slightly. She leaned back against the counter, arms crossed again, but her eyes found mine. Something unspoken passed between us, something that said we both knew how close we had been to crossing the line. "I should probably head out," I murmured, though my feet stayed planted. She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "No. Stay. Just not here." Her words were careful, but her gaze lingered in a way that made my chest tighten unbearably. We moved into the living room, awkwardly close but careful, circling each other like predators testing the edges of something forbidden. I noticed the subtle glances, the way she laughed softly at something I barely said, the way her hand brushed mine once, then pulled away slowly, as if she didn't want me to panic but also didn't want me to forget it. I sat down across from her, fingers tapping nervously against my knee. She followed, and for a moment, nothing was said. The silence was thick, weighted, and electric. I wanted to reach for her, to just touch her hand again, but the fear of discovery made me hesitate. And then, just as I was about to speak, she tilted her head, her lips barely inches from mine, and whispered, "Don't go yet." My breath caught. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to stay. I wanted everything, but I couldn't say it. Somewhere in that quiet, I realized the danger was exactly what made this feel impossible to resist. The living room felt smaller with every heartbeat. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge from the kitchen, the ticking of the clock, but all of it faded into the background of her presence. She was sitting across from me, and I couldn't stop staring at her, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell over one shoulder, the subtle swell of her lips as she bit the inside of her cheek. I tried to focus on the mundane, the throw pillows, the dim light, the way the shadows played on the walls. But she moved like a magnet I couldn't resist. Every subtle lean, every quiet breath, pulled me closer without a word. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down to see a text from my friend, "Where are you?" Panic and guilt slammed into me. I typed back a vague excuse, but my hands shook. She noticed, of course. Her eyes narrowed, not accusing, not angry, but something sharper, more intimate. "You're hiding something," she said softly, leaning slightly forward. My throat tightened. It's nothing," I stammered, but the lie tasted bitter. Her lips curved into that faint, knowing smile again, and I felt my resolve slipping. I hated that she had this effect on me. I hated that I wanted her to see everything I couldn't say. "Nothing?" she pressed, tilting her head. "You don't even look at me like it's nothing." I froze. My gaze flicked to hers and back, a silent acknowledgement that we were teetering on a line I'd promised myself I wouldn't cross. I wanted to speak, to confess the way my chest tightened whenever she laughed, the way I caught myself watching her move around the room as if memorizing her. But the words lodged in my throat. She leaned back slightly, but her hand brushed mine again, lingering longer this time. The warmth of her skin burned, and I had to swallow hard to keep from pulling away, or pulling her closer. "I shouldn't be doing this," she murmured, and something in her voice cracked. Desire? Confusion? Regret? All at once? I couldn't tell, but it hit me like a wave. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible, trembling. "Neither should I." A silence fell, heavy and electric, charged with everything we were both denying. I could feel my heart pounding, my pulse rushing in my ears. Every instinct screamed to move closer, to finally bridge the distance between us. And yet the rational part of me, the part still tethered to guilt, rules, and the world outside this room, whispered to stop, to back away, to breathe. She tilted her head, eyes locking with mine, and in that instant, I realized neither of us could ignore it any longer. Every hesitation, every suppressed thought, every stolen glance had led to this fragile, trembling edge. One step, and nothing could be undone. Then, the sound of a muffled knock at the door shattered the tension. Our eyes shot to it simultaneously, hearts caught in the same thundering rhythm. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. And for a fleeting, suspended moment, it felt like the world held its breath with us, on the verge of something irreversible. The knock at the door hadn't been random. I knew that instantly, though I didn't want to admit it. My heart was still pounding, the warmth of her hand lingering in memory, when the voice came, sharp, familiar, and wrong. "Hey, are you here?" My stomach dropped. My friend's voice. I hadn't even thought he'd be coming over tonight. I froze, glancing at her. She stiffened, lips parted slightly, eyes wide, not with fear, but calculation. "He's just stopping by," she said, but the slight falter in her voice told me she was lying. My pulse quickened. I wanted to stand up, to grab my bag and run, but my legs refused to obey. It wasn't just guilt, it was the thrill, the danger, the impossibility of what we were doing that held me rooted in place. The door opened before I could respond. My friend stepped in, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the room. Then he froze too, catching the tension between us. I could see the recognition flash across his face, subtle but unmistakable. "You too, he started, fumbling for words. I wanted to sink into the floor. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to reach for her and tell her it was nothing, it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't move. She, however, stepped forward slightly, her gaze calm but daring, and spoke with a composure that made my chest ache. "Hey," she said simply, as if greeting him normally. But the air was charged, fragile, dangerous. Every micro-gesture, every pause in her words, carried what we both were trying to deny. My friend shifted, uncertain, and I realized he'd overheard something, or maybe just sensed it. A laugh, a cough, a pause too long. His eyes flicked between us, and for the first time, I saw that impossible mixture of confusion and hurt. "I didn't expect you tonight," I said lamely, trying to fill the silence. She reached out, lightly touching my arm, not enough to betray, but enough to anchor me, to remind me that I wasn't alone in this chaos. My pulse slammed in response, and I knew I couldn't pretend any longer that everything was safe. My friend began again, but she interrupted with a soft, commanding tone. "It's fine. Really." Her eyes held mine, daring me to believe her, daring me to stay. And I did. Because leaving wasn't an option, not now, not after this edge we had teetered on for hours. As he wandered into the living room to sit, pretending to check his phone, the air between us seemed to pulse. Every stolen glance, every breath, every heartbeat felt magnified. We were on the edge, closer than ever, and yet someone was watching. The risk was no longer theoretical. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only feel the heat of her presence, the weight of our secret hanging like a storm above us. My mind screamed at me to run, to pull away, to erase this moment, but the truth was undeniable. I was too far gone, too entangled, too enthralled. Her hand brushed mine again, just barely, and I realized with a jolt that it didn't matter who was watching. We had already crossed the line, our hearts, if not our lips, had. And for the first time tonight, I didn't care what came next. The apartment felt impossibly small, every sound amplified, the shuffle of feet, the soft hum of the fridge, the quiet ticking of the clock. I could feel her beside me without touching her, the air between us taut with everything unspoken. My friend was somewhere in the living room, pretending to text, but I barely registered him. Nothing mattered except the warmth radiating from her, the impossible pull I couldn't fight. I turned to her, searching her face for a sign, any clue of what she wanted. Her eyes met mine, wide and raw, carrying years of restraint and longing I hadn't expected to see. My chest ached with it, a sharp, consuming burn. I can't do this wrong," I whispered, though my voice was trembling. "You won't," she replied softly. Her hand found mine, brushing the skin gently, intentionally, like she was testing if I'd run, or if I'd stay. And I stayed. I stayed because leaving wasn't an option. Not tonight. Not after everything that had brought us here, the quiet glances, the hesitant touches, the thrill of crossing boundaries we both knew we shouldn't. I stayed because whatever this was, it was real, messy, and impossible to ignore. Her thumb grazed the back of my hand, slow and deliberate, and I leaned forward almost without thinking. Her eyes flicked down, then back to mine, that mixture of fear and desire still written in every line of her face. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. And I realized then that fear was the only thing we'd been fighting all night. The fear of judgment, of guilt, of ruining something we couldn't put into words. I am too, I said. But I don't want to run. A small, tremulous smile curved her lips. The tension that had built for hours, the suppressed longing, the stolen glances, the silent confessions, broke in that moment. Her other hand moved to my cheek, tentative, almost reverent, and I felt the pull of everything we'd denied rush in. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. The world outside, my friend, the rules, the age gap, the consequences, slipped away into irrelevance. For a heartbeat, a long, fragile heartbeat, it was just us. Then the door opened slightly. The sound made both of us jump, but it was only the apartment's old creak, nothing more. I realized with a start that the night wasn't over, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the unspoken understanding we had reached, that we saw each other, fully, without pretense, without apology. Her hand lingered in mine, and I knew that however complicated, however uncertain, we would face it together. Maybe tomorrow the guilt would return. Maybe the world would push back. But tonight there was only this, the warmth of her touch, the depth of her gaze, the messy, impossible, undeniable connection that neither of us could deny. And for the first time, I realized that maybe love, real, flawed, forbidden, thrilling, was worth every risk. Morning light crept through the blinds, dust motes floating lazily in the quiet apartment. I was still on the couch, her hand tucked into mine like it belonged there, and for the first time, I let myself breathe without guilt pressing down. She stirred beside me, stretching, and the sight made my chest swell in a way I hadn't expected. "Morning," she murmured, voice soft, vulnerable. The warmth in her eyes was different now, steady, familiar, yet still charged with the spark that had kept us on edge all night. "Morning," I replied, my fingers tightening around hers, hesitant to let go even for a second. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the apartment waking up, the hum of the fridge, the distant sounds of traffic, the soft shuffle of her bare feet across the floor. No one else existed in that moment, and I realized with a jolt how rare and fragile this feeling was, being fully present with someone, without pretense, without guilt, without the weight of the outside world pressing in. "I don't regret it," she said finally, breaking the quiet. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the echo of every fear, every hesitation, every suppressed desire she'd fought to hide. I smiled, a little crookedly, because I felt the same. Me either. It felt like it was supposed to happen. Her gaze softened, and she leaned closer, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, and entirely human. I felt the tension that had haunted us for weeks dissolve into something quieter, deeper, more lasting. We talked then, not just about the night, but about the small things, the realities we'd have to face, our age difference, the whispers of judgment we might endure, the careful balance of keeping our connection intact. And somehow, talking made it easier, made it feel grounded, possible. By mid-morning, we were moving through the apartment with a new rhythm, brushing shoulders, laughing softly, teasing lightly, the subtle intimacy of two people who had navigated chaos together and come out stronger. Every glance, every touch, no longer carried the same forbidden tension, it carried understanding, comfort, and choice. At some point, I realized that whatever challenges awaited us outside these walls, we had something that wouldn't fade easily. Something that had begun as quiet glances and hesitant touches, forbidden and thrilling, had grown into trust, mutual desire, and a fragile, beautiful love. And for the first time since that night began, I didn't feel fear. I felt hope. I felt home. I leaned back against the couch, her hand still in mine, and let myself linger in the quiet certainty that we were finally, impossibly, together. Whatever the world thought, whatever obstacles might come, we had this. Our choice, our connection, our love. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?